Parshas Vaeschanan. Ready? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. This is a very exciting parsha, in my opinion, because it goes over the giving of the Torah, how the Torah was given, and if you take the time to actually read the psukim, read the verses, it's very inspirational. I know a great rabbi who, when he was a child, it was very difficult, growing up in America with so few religious people, and one of the things that he used to do to strengthen his faith in Hashem is read the part of this week's parsha about giving of the Torah. And it's very inspirational. So let's do that first. So page 968 if you want to follow along. If you don't want to follow along, it's also fine. It's
Verse?
Oh, right, different chumash. It is 5:1. Hey Aleph.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to just skip around a little bit when it talks to different parts of the giving of the Torah, how it was given, and then if we have time, which I assume we will, talk a little bit about the Ten Commandments, because that's also in this week's parsha. Or actually, as they're correctly translated, the 10 statements, because according to some, there are actually 13 commandments, or 11 commandments in the 10 statements, because a dibra doesn't mean commandment. Seres dibros doesn't mean commandment in Hebrew. But let's read, this, page 968, 5:1. Vayikra Moshe el kol Yisrael, vayomer aleim. Moshe called to the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, and said to them, Shema Yisrael es hachukim v'es mishpatim asher neichi dover ba'aznechem. Hear all the decrees and statutes which I speak, ba'aznechem in your ears, hayom, l'madtem osam u'shmartem lasosam, and be careful to carry them out. Hashem Elokeinu, kara simona bris b'chorev. Hashem our God made a covenant with us in Chorev, which is referring to Mount Sinai, the desert of Chorev. Lo es avosenu kara es Hashem es habris hazos. It's not with our forefathers that Hashem made this covenant. Ki itanu, anachnu, ela po hayom kolonu chaim. It wasn't with your forefathers that Hashem made this covenant. It was with you. You were there. He spoke to us. Panim bepanim dibra Hashem imachem. Face to face, He spoke to you. Bahar metoch eish, in the mountain, from the fire. Anochi omei ben Hashem v'benechem. I stood there between you and Hashem. Ba'is hahi lahagid lachem is devar Hashem, to tell you what Hashem was saying. Ki ereisim b'pnei eish. You were afraid of the fire. V'lo alisim bahar leimor. And to not go up in the mountain. You're afraid, and you did not ascend the mountain. And then it goes on to say the 10 Commandments. Right here, what happened is that the entire Jewish people, 600,000 men, and all their wives and all the children were sitting around Mount Sinai, standing around Mount Sinai, and Hashem actually spoke the first 2 commandments himself. God himself spoke these 2 commandments, the entire Jewish people at the same time, and the people couldn't handle it, so they said, "Please stop. We can't handle it." And Moshe did the rest. And you see here that Moshe is telling the people, it wasn't your forefathers that this happened to, it was you. It happened to you. That's one thing. So you see that the Torah is telling us that the giving of the Torah was a national revelation, meaning we're going to see soon, it's the only time in human history that such an event has happened, and it's the most important event in human history. And we're going to see that the Torah even makes this claim, which is very interesting. Let's go to page 964. 4:31. I'm going to start in Pasuk 4:31 for the non-Art Scroll users. Kikel rachom Hashem Elokecha lo yarbecha v'lo yashchisecha. God is a merciful God. He will not destroy you. V'lo yishkach es bris avosecha. He won't forget the covenant He made with your fathers, asher nishba lahem, which He swore to them. Ki sha'alna liyamim rishonim. Ask from the earliest days, asher hayu lefanecha lemina yom asher bara Elokim adam ala aretz u'lemikseh shemayim v'akatzeh hashemayim. Ask from all the days of creation and all the history of the world. Haniyah kadavar agalos. Has anything great like this ever occurred? O hanishma kamoho. Have you ever heard anything like this happen? Meaning the Torah itself is challenging, saying, have you ever heard of another nation even claiming to have something like this? And it continues. What has any nation ever heard? Hashama am kol elokim medaber metoch eish, to hear the voice of God speaking from the fire, kasher shamata ata vayechi, like you heard and survived. Has there ever been in human history a national revelation where you have God speaking to an entire people? The Torah itself is challenging us. Has it ever happened? So I'll tell you, no, it hasn't. I highly recommend this book. It's called Permission to Receive from Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman. It's a little blue book. I heard him speak many, many times. He was pursuing a doctorate in Harvard University, and the goal of his thesis was to disprove every religion. The way he did this was by he basically boiled down each religion that has some common parts. You usually have a guy who comes along and says, I have a message from God, and he wants you to do X, Y, Z. Meaning you have a revelation narrative, what's called, right? So Rabbi Kelman found that while each religion has just one person saying God spoke to them, and you either trust that guy or you don't trust them, when it came to Judaism, he wasn't able to finish his paper because it's not the same as every other religion. Judaism is the only religion that even claims that God spoke to an entire people. Why is that significant? Because while one person can make something up, right? If you have two people that make something up, let's say, two people claiming that God spoke to them, that's a lot harder because maybe someone, right, they keep their story straight. You have 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, 6 people. You have here millions of people that heard God speak. To make something like that up is impossible. Not only that, it wasn't just millions of people and we heard about it. It was millions of people that were our ancestors, our forefathers. And what's also interesting is that if you're going to make up a religion, you want to make something which you can't check out, right? You can't falsify. So one guy says, God spoke to me and he said X, Y, Z. Well, I can't prove that it's false, right? Because not necessarily, but how do I know you're telling the truth? But if I'm making a religion, I'm not going to want to say that millions and millions of people heard God speak because, well, I would just say you're a liar. How come I never heard about this before? Right? If someone will come to you and say, do you know your father, your great-great-grandparents heard God speak at Mount Sinai? You'd be like, well, how come I never heard about that before? So it's very hard to make something like that up. Whereas, that just shows the truth of it. Whereas, if one person will come and say, so-and-so heard God speak to him, and then he's telling us the message, you'd say, okay, maybe yes, maybe no, but I can't verify it. But to make such a claim, which is so easily falsifiable, if it didn't happen, that wouldn't be a good idea if you're trying to make up a religion. Furthermore, it's interesting that the Torah actually challenges it, right? If you were making something up, would you challenge the person, oh, you should look into this, by the way, right? Usually the psychology is, if you're making up a lie, you want to kind of get people to avoid the lie. But here you have the Torah itself saying, has this ever happened in human history that God spoke to an entire nation and had a national revelation? The Torah is challenging, saying, this happened, it's so confident that it's true, that check it out. Has this ever happened in human history? And I just want to share 2 interesting stories about this. One story, this is actually from Rabbi Kellerman. He actually became a religious Jew when he discovered this. After he looked through all the religions and noticed that it was always one guy who claimed that God spoke to him, and then he found Judaism and it says God spoke to the entire people, he became a religious Jew. And he was, I was in the airport. He met someone who was a Hare Krishna. The guys used to be in the airport back in the day.
Yeah, sure.
So, and he said to him, oh, what do you mean? We also have a national revelation. So he says, really, what happened? So he says there was a great battle between 2 armies, and God came out and he spoke to the 2 armies and they all died. So Rabbi Kalman said, what? Well, if they all died, how'd you hear about it? He said, oh, because several generations later, God spoke to this one man who said that would happen generations before, and that's how we know about it. Really, it really was the same thing. And he was, I don't know if this is true, but he was kind of saying that if you look at this pasuk here, it says, Hashama am kol halokim medaber metoch ha'esh. Has God ever spoken to a nation outside? Has God ever spoken through a fire? Kasher shamata ata vayachi, that you heard and lived, which is very interesting. So he thought maybe that was I don't know if it's, I doubt it's really the pshat and the explanation of the verse, but it says, have you ever heard God and lived, as opposed to this religion where they heard God and they did not live. But they obviously did not even hear God in the first place.
So you were talking about Twitter when I came in.
What?
You were talking about Twitter when I came in. About 60 million people got the same Twitter message.
Right.
More than 600,000.
What do you mean?
Oh, you were talking about the
Twitter? The fake tweet?
Yes.
Right.
As if it may be real.
Oh no, it was clear it was fake.
No, but the one from the president is similarly most probably not true.
Oh, what did he say? I don't even.
He thought the Clintons might have had their hand in it.
Oh, he said that today?
Yesterday?
Oh yeah, I haven't been following.
Yeah, I mean I heard that it sounded reasonable. I mean it's.
I don't know.
It's a challenge to belief that We have
Oh, you're saying because no, someone could definitely make something up, right? The difference is here is that if someone was making up this story, right? If someone would tweet today that all of the Jewish people 3 generations ago, they all lived in Japan and they used to be very good at karate or something, you would be like, well, that's ridiculous. I've never heard that in my life before, right? You can make up a lie about somebody else because, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, maybe there's a conspiracy, maybe man went on the moon, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But to say something happened to you or your ancestors, that would be ridiculous because you say, well, I never heard about that before. So that's absurd. And here the Torah is talking to the actual people that it happened to, and saying that. And it's not only that; it has to do with being in the national consciousness of the nation, right? Would anybody doubt in the United States that there was such a person named George Washington or Abraham Lincoln? No, because it's in the national consciousness of the American people. They were human beings that lived and did things where we live in our nation. Just like here, you have the Torah was given to our people, and we've had an unbroken tradition, which I hope to talk about later, the importance of tradition, and Masorah it's called, and how that relates. I hope that clarified that a little bit. Right, and not only that, we also have reminders of it, right? We put on tefillin, we have a bris milah, we have Pesach, we have all of these traditions which just reinforce the idea that this was an event which happened to the Jewish people, and for such a thing to have been created for the entire nation is really absurd, right? It's part of the national memory in our actions and what we teach our children, and what's been part of it for our entire history. But there was another story. I don't want to forget the other story. Someone made this argument to my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Feldman, told us this. There was a rabbi, I know who it is, I'm not going to say his name, but in Palo Alto, California. And he teaches a lot of Jewish people that are not religious. And there was a young man, he was in college, and he became interested in Judaism. And one of the things that convinced him was this fact, that Judaism is the only religion which claims to have a national revelation, that God spoke to the entire people at one point in history. And he said it, if it wasn't true, how come no other religion ever claimed it, right? You would think it's a much stronger claim to say the entire nation heard God than just one person. So if it's falsifiable, if it's not true, then how come some other religion hasn't claimed it in human history, right? There's been thousands of religions. So that helped him become religious. And now his parents were not so excited about that. I don't know if you know this, but sometimes parents are not excited when their kids start observing more of Judaism. So this... They hired a professor of Egyptology to research if there's ever been a religion. I'm not sure if the professor was an Egyptologist, but it was a college professor in the Palo Alto area, and he wrote a 90-page paper showing about this group in ancient Egypt that believed in national revelation. So this kid was very upset. His faith was shattered. So he took the paper and he showed it to this rabbi. The rabbi went to an Egyptologist, and the Egyptologist told him this is all made up. There was no such group. And they found out later that the parents had paid the college professor, and that the college professor had plagiarized the whole thing and just made up the whole thing to make a quick buck.
Now, the Jews who didn't leave Mitzrayim, who stayed,
yes,
they were no longer Jews.
They died.
They died.
Yeah, 4/5. They died. There were Egyptians that left with the Jews that became part of the Jewish people, and they have given us trouble ever since, known as the Erev Rav.
Okay.
Gotta watch out for them. But no, so what do you take out of that story? Just because one is that it's still Judaism is the only religion that this happened, and two is that you cannot always trust academics and professors. But I don't think I'm sure there are honest professors out there. Some. Okay. That Hashem, once you believe there's a God and that He created humanity with a purpose, which I think is pretty obvious because most of us, all of us, really, human beings feel that they were created with a purpose. And once you believe that there's a God, it would make sense that God would reveal this purpose to humanity, right? It doesn't make sense for God to give humans a desire to have a purpose and not tell them what that purpose is, right? So that event happened at Mount Sinai. that is when God told us this is the purpose of humanity with the Torah. Really, God wanted to give the Torah to all of humanity, right? Not just for the Jews, but all of humanity wasn't on the level to receive the Torah yet. It was only Abraham and his descendants who were at that high enough spiritual level to receive the mission from God, and it would be through the Jewish people that the rest of humanity would get that message. Now, what's interesting here is that if you have God speaking to an entire people, telling him what he believes, telling them what the mission and what their purpose in life is, and this is what I want from you, and he does it in front of millions and millions of people, and he says, don't take away from it, don't add it, and there's never going to be another thing like this. Would it make sense to tell one person that the entire Torah is abrogated, you don't have to follow it anymore, and rather there are these new rules that you have to follow? I believe that is very illogical, and it goes against what the Torah said. There is a famous parable that's given, right? There's a king dies and he leaves over 2 sons, and they don't know who should be king. So one of the you have this, one prince and all of his followers, and the other prince and all of his followers. And one day one prince gets up and says, I know that I am the rightful heir to the throne, I am the king. So how do you know? Because my father came to me in a dream last night, and he told me that I'm the king. So the other guy will say, well, if that's true, why didn't he come to me in a dream and tell me that? Right? That doesn't make any sense. If God wanted to change his mind, after he told millions of people, he would have told the same millions of people that he changed his mind. Well, obviously God doesn't change his mind, and if he's going, and if he would change his mind, he wouldn't tell it to one person and not tell the actual people that he originally gave the first message to. Okay, thank you for that second shot in Rashi. So that was just for the psukim, and again, I highly recommend just reading through the verses in the parsha. But I want to read a Rambam. This Rambam is found in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, the Fundamentals of Torah, 8:1. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu lo haaminu bo Yisrael mipnei ha'oz she'asa. The people didn't believe in Moses because of the miracles that he performed. She'hamaimen al pi she'amaz yesh believe adofi she'avsher she'asa oz v'kishuv. Because somebody who does miracles, if you believe in Moshe, meaning and the truth of the Torah because of miracles, you could have doubts. Say, well, maybe Moshe is just a very good sorcerer and he knows some magic tricks. All of the miracles that Moshe did in the desert, they were needed. It wasn't to prove that he was a prophet and prove that he was a servant of Hashem. They was just because they were needed at that time. He needed to drown the Egyptians, so he split the sea and then put it back. People needed food, so they brought down, Hashem brought down manna for the people. They were thirsty, so he had the stone give forth water. Karach and his followers rebelled, so the ground opened up. And all of the miracles. What do we believe in Moshe? What do we believe in the truth of the Torah? It's not because of the miracles, but rather Har Sinai, with the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's why we believe in Hashem and the Torah and Moshe. She'einenu ra'u v'lo zar. Our own eyes saw and nobody else, not a stranger. V'aznenu shamu v'lo acher. Our ears heard and not another. Ha'esh v'hakolos v'halapidim v'hunagesh rafel v'hakol. We saw we heard the sounds and the fire and the other things. Medaber elav anu shomin Moshe. Leichamer lehem kach v'kach. We heard Hashem say, Moshe, tell him this and this. V'cheinu amar bepanim davar Hashem imachem. He says, face to face he spoke to you. V'nemer lo asavosinu karas es bris hazos. In the verse that we just saw, it says, not with our forefathers did Hashem make this bris, rather with you. Minayin shemayim Har Sinai levado hi harayel nevuaso shehema she'en bodovi shnemar hine anochi ba'alecha ba'av v'anan ba'avor yishama ham divrei amcha v'gam b'cha yaminu la'olam. And after it talks about Har Sinai, it says they will also believe in you forever. Michlal shekodem davar zeh lo aminu bo ne'emana shehiamedes la'olam al ne'emana sheish achar hiro machshav. The Rambam says that if you believe in the prophecy of Moshe and the truth of the Torah just because of the miracles that happen, you could have doubts still. You could have sveikus. Maybe it was witchcraft, maybe it was a seismic event at just the right time for the splitting of the sea. The only real way that you believe that the Torah is true because you were there and your eyes saw it. And the same with us, that our forefathers, we have an unbroken tradition that this is what happened, that God spoke to the entire Jewish people And that is the source of the emunah, the faith of a Jew, in the giving of the Torah. Any questions? Nope. Twitter? All good? Did I answer the Twitter question? Not so much?
Yeah, not as much.
No, ask me. You can ask me. Let's try better.
No, let's move on.
Okay, fine. I'm just saying that this happened to our forefathers, and we have an unbroken tradition. And if someone would come make something up that this happened to you or to your forefathers, you would say, "I don't believe you. You just made that up. I never heard about it before." But since we know, and since that's not the case, that's why we know that it's true. Okay. All right. We mentioned that really Hashem, the Derech Hashem, which we learned Sunday mornings, really talks about this at great length. How Hashem wanted to give His really message to the entire people, but the entire people wasn't worthy. They were great sinners at the time, in the days of old, and the only person who was worthy of getting that message to what God wanted from them was Abraham and his children, which is us. That's why we got it. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Ten Commandments. So, we were just talking about the Ten Commandments, of how they were given. Now, let's actually talk about the Ten Commandments themselves. Now, it's not actually 10 commandments. The proper translation is statements or things, something like that. The 10 statements. Now, why are these 10 statements singled out as being in the 10 commandments? We know there are 613 commandments. Any theories? So, obviously they're very important. That's all I could come up with on my own. But I was reading a book by Rav Moshe Eisman. I had it sitting in my house for years, and I hadn't looked at it. And I looked at it, and I was very happy I did, because what he does is he explains that the 10 Commandments are 10 statements that are the constitutional principles for the Jewish people to be a holy nation. And he goes through each of the 10 Commandments and discusses what is so integral in these commandments to make them the constitutional principles to be a holy nation. And, right, I'm not going to go through each one, but I want to touch on some of them. Right, the first one, that I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt, that seems fairly obvious. That the whole point of Judaism, we brought monotheism to the world, and we believe in one God. And I was just actually speaking about this the other day with somebody, that when you think about it, the Jewish people were a small tribe in the Middle East, where we believed in one God. Every other tribe or nation was polytheistic and idol worshippers and all these things, and you have one small group of Jews, Hebrews, that say, nope, there's one God, everything's unified, one God who has a direction for the universe. And now, if you look around, billions and billions of people really believe that. Christians and Muslims pretty much believe that there's one God, and they got it from us. So if you really just look at human history from standing, taking a bird's eye view of human history, it's really quite unbelievable, because back in the day there were literally thousands and thousands of beliefs. Why should this small tribe of Hebrews have influenced human history to the point where most of the world believes, basically in one God? And not only that, right, Christians and Muslims also have the Old Testament. They believe that the giving of the Torah officially was an event which occurred. Right? Not only do we believe it, but the Christians and Muslims also believe that there was a point in human history where God gave the Torah to the entire Jewish people, which I think is very, very interesting. Also, the Rambam writes that the monotheistic religions are actually a path to when Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, the whole world is going to realize God is one, right? And that the Jewish people are the chosen people. Can you imagine if it was just us believing in monotheism and the rest of the world still believed in many, many gods? It would be a big shock for everybody. But now, you have, even though we don't share the same beliefs as Christians and Muslims, but they do share a very fundamental belief, for the most part, in monotheism, so when Mashiach comes, it's not such a big jump. The Rambam writes something like that. Okay. So I was going to talk about... So I was hoping to talk... Oh, also, in the Parsha, we're talking about Hashem being one. Shema is in the Parsha. Right? There's so much going on in this week's Parsha that I can't leave over without mentioning Shema. Right, the whole meaning of our faith, that we say it twice a day, that God is one, and that's really not only that He's one, but also that He's the master of the universe. Right, you could believe that God is one and that He doesn't care what we do. That's not what we believe. When we say Shema, we do what we call Mekabel Ol Malchus Shema, and we say God is the one in charge, and I'm going to do or try my best to do whatever He wants and follow the commandments, and I'm going to do what He wants and not what I want. So one of the Ten Commandments, the fifth commandment, in fact, is honoring parents. So I just want to talk a little bit about this. So Rabbi Eisman, in the book I was mentioning, he says, what's so fundamental about the mitzvah of honoring parents that it should be in the Ten Commandments? So he writes that, I know I said that they're not called the Ten Commandments, but for force of habit, I just keep calling them that. It's really the 10 statements or whatever. But he says that what's fundamental to Judaism is Masorah, tradition. Not just like Fiddler on the Roof tradition, or you do random things because that's your tradition, but that every father teaches his son, teaches his children, a mother, every parent teach their children, this, God spoke to us, this is the Torah, this is what we believe, and it goes from generation to generation through the family unit. The family unit is that mechanism, that way that this message, God's message, gets transferred to future generations. He says that's only possible when you have children respecting their parents. And it just doesn't mean being nice to them, but actually respecting them like a teacher and like a with honor, right? There's two mitzvahs. You're supposed to respect your parents. You're supposed to fear them. You're not supposed to sit in your father's seat. You're supposed to treat them with reverence, something that we don't always do. But the idea is that when you treat your parents with honor, respect, and reverence, then that allows the family unit to be solid, where these messages of Judaism can be transferred from generation to generation, and that's really why it's such a fundamental principle. I know that I heard a story of a famous rabbi, and I'm not going to say who it is, but he had his older parent living with him. Now, this is a respected rabbi we're talking about, very respected, right, an honored person, very refined person. And his father was very old and unfortunately couldn't control his bowels. And he would have to go on his hands and knees in the bathroom and clean it up. Right? This very respected rabbi who was taking care of his father. So his brother walked by and he said, I smell the smell of heaven, of Gan Eden. Meaning, right, we have to do that for our parents when they get older. That even though it seems to be like a disgusting task, cleaning feces off of the floor, but his brother was making the point. He walked by, he smelled the reich of Gan Eden, he said, the smell of heaven, meaning this is exactly what we should be doing to merit getting into heaven. Also, there's a cute story. There's a really good book called The Fifth Commandment. Art Scroll publishes it by Rabbi Moshe Lieber about the laws of honoring parents. And sometimes we don't realize how far they go. It's very difficult. And it's one of the two mitzvahs it says in the Torah that you will get merit long life for doing this. And even if they're gone, there's still ways to honor them if they're gone, right? Okay, then I just want to talk about a little bit about Shabbos before we finish. Shabbos is one of the 10 statements, 10 commandments, and that's the fourth commandment. Now, what is so special about Shabbos? One thing it is the obvious reason, is that it's the day where we commemorate the fact that God created the world and He rested on the seventh. We're testifying to the fact that Hashem created the world. So if you think about it, I always get chizuk from this. When you walk to shul in Manalapan, there aren't a lot of religious people walking to shul on Shabbos. But every car that walks by, they say, oh, there's a religious Jew walking to his synagogue on Shabbos because he's resting, because God created the world. That's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. People see you walking to shul on Shabbos because you're making a statement that I believe God created the world, gave humanity a mission, and I'm a Jew, and I'm testifying to that fact. So that's the obvious thing about Shabbos, and very important that's in the Ten Commandments. I want to add another aspect, though, that we were learning in the Derech Hashem Shir, that there's another aspect of Shabbos, that God put us in a world which is a physical world of physicality. And the purpose is because we're supposed to elevate ourselves to do mitzvos, to connect with the spiritual, even though we have this drive of physicality. And we're in a predominantly physical world where holiness is very hard to connect to. But that's the point, so that we sanctify the profane and we can get close to Hashem that way. However, Hashem didn't want it to be that everything would be so unholy that it would just overtake us and we wouldn't be able to connect to Hashem at all. So He made one day out of 7 that we have a hashpah, we have certain spiritual energy coming down that we can tap into to reinvigorate our spiritual lives so we don't be overcome by the physicality. And that day is Shabbos. That's what happens on Shabbos. Shabbos, there is a certain spiritual energy that you're able to tap into, to connect to, that you shouldn't be overtaken by the total physicality of the world. And that's another idea of Shabbos. And I might have mentioned this before. There was a Rebbe, right, who said there's a halacha. He understands every halacha in the Talmud except for one thing. There's a halacha that if you are in the wilderness and you don't know which day Shabbos is, then you count 7 days, and on the 7th day you keep Shabbos. Right? You don't know, you forgot the day of the week. So he says, I don't get it. How could you not know when Shabbos is? The spiritual energy is so palpable. How could you not know? Meaning Shabbos was so real to him that he felt it. It was like a different day. It was just totally different, and he was had such a higher sense of spiritual level that he can come into contact with it. And it's true. If you keep Shabbos and you have a little bit of an elevated soul, you can feel that Shabbos is a different day. You could learn Torah better on Shabbos. You can grow more than you could on the week, and that day is supposed to reinvigorate us for the rest of the week. And that's why also the Ramchal in Derech Hashem says that Shabbos is the end of the week. Not only is it just one day to reinvigorate us spiritually, but the whole week goes to that. The whole purpose of the week is for Shabbos. So that gives it even more prominence, that we're always building towards it. And just to conclude the idea of Shabbos, why is there a prohibition of malacha, of doing work? So he writes, because since it's a spiritual day where we're saying that this is the day where we're disconnecting from the physical so that we can have this spiritual energy, we try as much as possible not to do physical things, right? It's obviously, he writes, it's impossible to just totally not be physical because we are physical, but we don't do malacha, we don't do work in order that we can separate ourselves from the physical. And also, since we have this added spiritual energy, there's a mitzvah to honor the Shabbos. We make kiddush, we have good foods and things like that, so we can honor that extra level of spirituality. And that's the end for this week. And even though we only touched on 2 commandments, but it's a lot to do. Big topics. Go. Sorry about messing up that joke.